I am so pleased. You can see him right there. John Luger joins us, and he has written something that I think is something I've never seen before, to be honest, that I think is, I really say this with high praise, John, that it's something unique and something that needed to be addressed. And it's the gray areas we're going to talk about. And the name of his book is Denominations from God or Man, Volume 1, 2, 3. What's really cool too about this, and I think it's always so vital when you go into books like this, is that you invite the people to be engaged. And he does that. He's got questions. There's so many things there. And as far as resources for you that are listening to this to go ahead and attack that. And I think that makes a very big difference. So you're not sitting on the sidelines. John, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you on. Obviously, you're a believer, but you went a little bit deeper. Tell the listeners what it was that motivated you to, first of all, dive into this subject.
To denominationalism. Well, it started a while back, and I grew up in the Lutheran denomination, and all my life. And Dad was on the board, and I went, as a kid and as a teen, and so on. But I never took religion all that seriously. Yeah, I went, and of course, the Lutheran Church. They did, they treat the scriptures, they read from the scriptures, they preach from the scriptures, but I never took them, I guess, all that seriously. And when I met my wife in '74, she was a member of the Lord's Church. She took it a different way. She was really into the scriptures, and I thought, well, all right, I'll try to please her, and I'll start looking into the scriptures a little bit more. And so it took me a long time. It took me over 2 years to really come to realize that the scriptures were more than just kind of a bouncing board for preachers. It was, the words were really interesting and true. And so I'm saying all this to say that I started to take them seriously. And so I changed after a period of time, and was baptized into the church. And so at the time we moved to Indiana, and we were the congregation, and I'm still trying to answer your question here, but we had a year long, and I was a deacon in that church. And we were tasked with trying to come up with a focus on evangelism and who are the lost and this kind of thing. And I thought, well, okay, you can take maybe for granted the people that don't like God or dismiss God altogether. Are they lost? Well, you could guess that, yeah, maybe they are lost. What about other people that are in like? And bottom line, I chose denominations. I grew up in one. I really thought, didn't think too much about scriptures and so on and so forth. Was I in a state of, a little bit of confusion, and was I in a safe condition and so on and so forth? And I thought, well, perhaps not. And what about the other denominations out there? And so I approached the leadership of the church, and I said, I'm going to focus on that. I think that maybe some of the people, some of the denominations, if not many, are in a condition of I'm not sure. And they said, no, you can't teach on that. You can't talk about that. And the reason was they didn't want to shoo away people that would come in for fear of offending them, and they wanted to grow the church. And I said, wow, that's not too cool in my mind. So I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to write about it. That's where I started getting serious about trying to write to circumvent my preclusion to teach on the subject at the moment. And the more I got into it, and the more I studied about not only what I knew of the Lutheran Church, but of the other churches out there, the more I kind of discovered that what they taught and what they professed, I couldn't read in Scripture. And it kind of boils down to, do you believe Scripture is true? And this kind of thing. And that's a whole other different subject. We can get into this a little bit, but when I took it seriously, I thought, okay, is the scripture valid? And in the back of this first volume, I start in all my books, and there's 5 in a series that I cover on denominations. I start with trying to build credibility for the scripture because I know a lot of people out there discount the scriptures for various reasons. And if you discount the scriptures, none of these books make any sense because I reference them throughout to argue that okay, here's a doctrine of the church we're addressing, denomination we're addressing. Here's what Scripture says. Well, if you say the Scripture is no good, well, what's the point? So that's the reason there. I know I'm kind of going off on that, but that's how I started, and it's interesting. I'm still not done, but I have I've gone this far with it, but that's where I started.
Yeah, so the title makes sense. Denominations from God or man. And you're disproving, let's say, some of what people believe. So I can understand why that might ruffle a few feathers, but it's so interesting because it's right there. I mean, you really made me think about that harder too in my own life where I was looking and I'm like, wow. Um, and and you're not necessarily dissing denominations. You're saying you got to think about what's, man or God in that gray area. And I think, and John, you and I talked about this off the air, there's a lot of confusion out there.
Yeah, there is. And just as and I'm not sure, even in the Lutheran denomination that I was in, I wasn't aware of all the doctrines that they profess. And I don't think a lot of people that are sitting in the pew are encouraged to know. They don't go online to find all the different beliefs of that particular denomination. They go to church, they listen to the preacher, whatever groups they may be in, study groups. They're kind of directed to look at the scriptures the way that denomination wants them to look at the scriptures. But what do they profess? I found out later that, for instance, that the Lutheran Church, Martin Luther was one of the founder of that church, and it's interesting. He didn't even want his name associated with the church. He said that he, in no way did he want that, but eventually it was adopted under his banner. Well, his doctrines, he professed that he wanted. He said that one must be baptized to be saved. Period. And the Lutheran Church today holds that doctrine, and it's one of their confessions, and one of the things that he taught as authority. They believe that. But they also have a doctrine that discounts that, and they believe in faith only, that you can have faith in Jesus Christ, and that alone will save you, and that baptism is an exercise you do after the fact. And they hold both of those as authority. Well, how can that be? And I looked at that. I thought, wow, I wonder if the person sitting in the pew knows that. And very few people do. So that's another thing the book kind of highlights. That's a gray area. And I would say, even if you approach them with that, what are they going to say about that? Because there's two doctrines that they hold as authority. Are you going to say, well, that one we really don't? Okay, well, then why do you say that you do online?
Right,
And
right.
this kind of thing. And you find those inconsistencies almost in a lot of the denominations out there. And so that it's interesting. And so it doesn't align with, again, with the scriptures. So.
Right. So you break it down into three volumes. Tell us a little bit more about volume one.
Okay, volume one starts out, and I thought, okay, what is a denomination? People, we throw that word out all the time, but the word itself means division. So we have different denominations out there. A denomination of money, we have different types of different denominations of money. The same thing applies to these denominations. So I said, well, let's talk about what a denomination is, and did God want his church to be split up into different denominations? And if you look at them, if you look at the different numbers, they all teach a little different. They have different teachings, and on what? On how to worship, on the subject of baptism, the subject of the Lord's Supper, on subject of fellowship, and who's leading the church, so on and so forth. They all have little differences, what did God mean for that to happen? And then so we talk about I talk about that in the first chapter. We talk about and are they supposed to be all inclusive? And is there anything wrong with this? And so on and so forth. So we talk about denominations in the first chapter. It's not a long chapter, but it's a very focused chapter. Then I drift into the church that Christ started in the first century. And a lot of people, I don't know if they're aware or they're told that they are their denomination is that church or is part of that church. Okay, and it's there. It's a singular church that Christ started. Well, it's defined by all the acts that are in there, acts of worship, and all the parameters that Christ put together to emulate that particular church that he established. And that's leadership, that's organization, that's how to become a member of that church, and so on and so forth. We talk about that, and that's a good section that I focus on too. And it's called the Church of Christ, and it's so it's in there, and it's all scripture focused, and scripture. You know, the only where you find that is in scripture, and then I drift into the final chapter, which is the bulk of that first volume, is the Roman Catholic Church, which is the first church that changed things a little bit. Okay, they changed some of the teachings, and I did that for a reason because the Catholic Church is by and large the largest denomination out there. Okay, and 50% of the people in this country, and by and large the world, are of that denomination. So I thought, okay, we'll start with denominations as a topic, try to get information to people. Okay, did God want denominations? We talk about the church itself that he started, talk about the Roman Catholic Church as the biggest denomination out there. What do they do? Does it align with Scripture? That's the first volume. And I think it's foundational because the rest of the books in the series, the second one I talk about the Orthodox Church, the Episcopal Church, and the Lutheran Church, and they take up a good 400-page read. And the Orthodox is very, very similar to the Catholic Church, as is the Anglican or the Episcopal Church here in the States, but they follow along very similar lines as those. And so I address those, and in the third book, I talk about the more of the Reformed churches, and we start there with the Anabaptist churches, which are the Amish and the Mennonites in this group, and then I go into also I get into the Calvinism as a topic. John Calvin, his theology we see in a number of churches. The tenets of original sin and once you're saved, you're always saved. We look at those types of points that he has. A lot of churches have picked up more on the positive tenets that he had, not so much on there's only an elect number of people that are going to be saved. He had that tenet too. A lot of churches have shied away from those, but then Presbyterian Church, Methodist Church, these kind of things. So we get into the more I don't say modern churches, but the more recent churches in that one. And then the fourth and fifth are up. I've got the manuscripts pretty well written on those, but they're yet to come out. And then I'll cover the Baptists, and the last one covers the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, and some of these that are, I would say, not technically denominations because they didn't split from other groups. They were more, they claim that they received revelation from God, so they just came out of nowhere type of thing. And so they're, I would consider more cults than I would consider denominations from a split, that
Yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah. I wanted to mention too that you can go to
.com,
johnluggerpublishing.com.
yeah.
Sure, very easy to remember that. Also, obviously, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever great books are sold for any of these books that we're talking about, to cover the way so thoroughly, the way that you've done this, with the career that you're still in. I mean, this really, you dove deep. This had to take a lot of time to do that.
Yeah, I did. I started, as I say, way back. It's been about 15, about 16 years ago. I was in Indiana, and that's when all this occurred. I took interest in starting to write, but it started with a lot of research, and I had a day job at that time. I was in outside sales, and it just soaked up a lot of time, and I just did this on the side. So I didn't really put pen to paper till really a few years ago. I started really amassing all the research that I had, and I started putting it together. And so it's kind of funny. I started with one volume, and it was like a over 1,000-page volume. And I went to a publisher and I said, "Hey, what about this?" And they said, "This is never going to fly." So it's weight. So we first split it up into three, and then it ended up into five ultimately. And then as I started to write, interestingly, it even grew further as I did a little more research and as things go. So each of these volumes ended up being, almost a 400-page read each of the five. So we've got three out and more to come. So that's what we've got.
I mean, you're saying it throughout the conversation, but what do you hope people take away from reading volume one, two, three, going all the way through, or picking up one, whatever it is they decide to do and follow along the path?
Well, I hope people read this with first with an open mind. That's the first thing you have to have it. And if the other thing is, I want people to take, like I did, take scripture seriously. That's the thing that will either make or break this. And if you have any doubts about it, don't start at the beginning of the book. Start at the end. Start at the appendix. I have a section on there in the first book called "Defending the Inspiration of Scripture." It's only about a 12 or 15-page section, but I dive deep into why are the words of Scripture uh, claimed to be inspired by God. And, what does inspiration mean? There are different theories about, well, is every word inspired? Are the thoughts inspired? Were they dictated word by word by the Spirit of the man? What exactly made up the words of Scripture? How did that come about? And then we talk about proving that the words of Scripture are true. And it's very interesting. It's what kind of turned me when I started reading it, started looking into this. I mean, if you look at one of the strongest proofs is prophecy. And these are things that the Scripture, it's not just like Esquire or Star, where the law of averages, okay, he predicts this and a good portion of it comes true. No, 100% of what's predicted in Scripture comes true to the T. So, and predictions made in Scripture are not just generalizations, they are very exact and they come true exactly as predicted. And not just a few years apart, but hundreds of years apart. There's no way it could have been orchestrated or foreseen, and this, that, and the other. And it's not just so far back that it's not recorded historically. They are historically documented. So it's if you believe your history book is true, then start looking at Scripture, and these predictions are historically documented, and they come true every time. So that's something that you look at. That is just one example, but as far as proving Scripture to be something a little extraordinary than just Shakespearean words written on a paper, inspired meaning just inspired like Shakespeare was inspired to write. Something different we got here with Scripture. So I guess what I want readers to take away from my book is first look at the Scriptures as really something unusual, and then start looking at what I say in this book to direct you to denominations as a topic, and then tie it to the scriptures. And I don't profess to be a genius on this. I'm trying to put the words of scripture to the doctrines that I have found from these different denominations and put them together
Yeah.
and let you decide, you the reader decide, does it make sense, or is there, and again, that falls back on, you got to believe the scriptures are true or it doesn't make sense. So that's what I wanted to take away when they go into this. And if you have an open mind to this, and you end up believing that scriptures are true, and again, the balance of the other books, the second book I have, we address translation of the scriptures in the appendix. A lot of people dismiss scripture because they think that over time it's been translated incorrectly. So you can't count on the words because the words are not the words of the original, the people that penned them. We don't have those exact words.
Right.
But if you do some, and I did the research, and one of the big things that I found was, have you heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? That was, they were unearthed not too awful long ago.
Yeah.
Well, all of those, and it captures both the Old and the New Testament almost in its entirety. Every word that they have found in there matches what we now have in our Bibles. Almost, not all, there's just a few variances, but
Right.
they don't matter. In other words, they found a variance in a passage that said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord thy God." And what they found was that the word holy was repeated 5 times, not three. Just little things like that, but that's the
Right.
variances you find. Nothing substantial to change the meaning of the words or the word, content. So you see things like that verify what we have. So you say, okay, the translation of the scriptures look to be sound. Whatever you may say about how it was translated, here we have something that was discovered in, what was it, 1950, 60, whatever it was,
Yeah.
Arab boy found in the Dead Sea area. Man, how can that be if and so it has been, and then the third volume, I get into transmission of the scriptures over time. How could they copy these things correctly? Xerox was not around back then, so how did they? So we talk about that. I'm trying to erase slowly the arguments that people have to dismiss scripture, so that at least they're open to the idea. There's some people out there that are really staunch about it, say, well, even with all this, I think the scriptures are off because. But if I can get a person to believe, just open the door enough to say that, okay, well, maybe the majority of scripture, maybe most of scripture, well, maybe all the scripture
Right.
is exactly what it says it is, then you open the books that I direct, and my work is not scripture, but it is trying to direct people that even in denominations that purport to be instruments of God, particularly in worship, I think is important to know what the scriptures say.
Boy, I agree with you. It's amazing to cover it in depth the way that you have. Is there anything else that you would throw in? But I think we covered it. I mean, I think you dive into this, and again, what you hope people take away, you've really laid it out, I think, throughout this. And then, of course, the questions and study guides and all of that.
Yeah, I did do, we haven't talked that up too much, but along with the main books, I thought, okay, even if you're in different churches, or if you want to do it, an individual could take this. What I've done is I put together study guides or
Yeah.
workbooks, and all I've done is condense the material in the main books down to one or two study guides, and they're not huge, but they're 13 lessons because most studies in a church setting is a quarterly study. They have 13 weeks.
Sure.
And so I divided it up into that into short lessons, and then there's questions at the end. And I spend more time trying to come up with the questions than I do trying to condense the material, because I think it's important for particularly a discussion group to focus on questions that delve, and they're not just, multiple choice things or just something very shallow. These are questions to try to get you to think. And if it's in a discussion group, it's something that will drive a 30-minute discussion, each question, because it's meant to ask things that go even beyond what the lesson was talking about, to bring in other ideas of Scripture to the point. And so those books are out there as well to kind of go along with the main volumes.
Yeah.
So
Again, wonderful conversation. John Lugger, you can get the books, like we said, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, johnluggerpublishing.com, and you got the volume 1, 2, and 3, Denominations from God or Man. Thank you so much.